Should I share the screen now or just wait?
You could share it.
Okay.
Oh, I can see we have some people joining. Hopefully you got to be a part of the opening keynote with Paul Garcia. If not, don't worry, it's going to be available on demand. And we're just going to give individuals some time to get in, get set, get ready for our next discussion. We have David Staples here from Velocity EHS, and we are so excited to have him join us. And we're going to be talking about the SEC and climate disclosures and risk. So you see right now on your screen, there's a poll question and we already have people answering it. So what do you hope to get out of this event? What questions do you think you're going to have for David, or what do you want him to cover? Because we really want to make this half hour that we have together as beneficial as possible. So I do want to welcome David, and I know he's getting ready to pull up the slides to go through part of his presentation before we really jump into a discussion. But while he's doing that, David, I really, tell us about yourself, your background, what brought you to this position that you are currently in.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Thanks for having me here today. I'm David Staples, Solution Executive here at Velocity EHS, which is a EHS and ESG software vendor. Been with the company for just about 13 years. My background is in sustainability. I did a postgraduate degree in Australia. I wanted to do something somewhat productive while learning how to surf many moons ago, and then came back and been working for Velocity ever since. My role is multifaceted. I have commercial responsibility over the ESG and environmental compliance, air, water, waste capabilities, but the company's asked me to keep an eye on the roadmap and marketing materials and doing thought leadership, such as what I'm doing today, making sure our sales folks are trained up, our implementations are running smoothly. So it's just everything and everything that needs to be done to make sure that Velocity HS is on top of our ESG game as well.
Wonderful. So what happened to your surfing career?
Well, kids and Canadian winters happened to my surfing career.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm sharing my screen. At least I hope I am. Can you
I
see
don't
that?
see it yet. Did the green share screen button, did you click that at the bottom? There we go.
Okay.
It's coming up. It should be coming up there. Now we see it.
Awesome. Okay. Apologies for that.
No worries. Okay, so yes, as we said before, David is here, is going to talk to us all about SEC guidelines, what they're about. So what do we need to know? What does this audience need to know about the SEC guidelines?
Yep. So the SEC guidelines aren't too broad-based. They were somewhat watered down over a series of rounds of litigation, if you will. But the final rule that has been finalized by the Securities and Exchange Commission really has 4 categories of disclosures. The first one, climate-related risks, is where we're going to be focusing the majority of our time today, discussing exactly what climate-related risks means and what registrants, what type of disclosures they have to make in this area in their annual filings. The second category of disclosures, Jessica, is around financial impacts from severe weather events. So we're talking tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, extreme heat, drought, sea level rise, anything you can pretty much imagine associated with severe weather events and climate change. The third is scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emission reporting. There was a mandate for scope 3 reporting as well, so value chain and direct emissions, but that was removed from the final rule based on feedback and issues brought up by various parties. And then the fourth category of disclosures that the SEC is looking for are attestation or third-party reporting audits. These things will be phased in depending on the size. I have a table that I'll be sharing, but those are the four general disclosures from the SEC associated with this rule.
Got it. Okay. Now, I know we would like to be able to jump in and talk about all of these, but we're really going to be focusing today, obviously, on climate risk assessment. So can you give our audience a clear description of what is expected to be considered, what companies have to consider for their climate risk assessment?
Yes, there are more than what I'm sharing with you here, but this is the general spirit of the climate risk disclosures that the SEC is looking for. So just going through them one by one here, I'm sharing 5, and this is kind of the general theme of the climate risk disclosures. So the first one is the big one, obviously, the material climate related risks for your company. So it's really, your threshold, your definition of materiality or importance will differ. Maybe it's a percentage of your revenue that would be impacted, or percentage of your operations, physical space, what have you. There's different definitions of what materiality means for companies, but the SEC really wants you to take an account of what risks pose a serious threat to the valuation of your organization, because this is going to be used just like traditional financial disclosures, profit and loss, income statements, revenues, things like that, that have been around for over 100 years or so. That's also going to be taken into account for investors, institutional investors. They're going to be looking at the risks posed to your business valuations posed by climate change. So that's the big one. Complementary disclosures, excuse me, in this category is that the SEC is looking for companies to disclose their process for identifying, assessing, managing these risks. And materiality is always, these are only material risks. That's a theme consistent throughout when we're speaking about risks. They're also looking to understand the activities that companies are going through to mitigate or adapt to these risks. They want to know what you're spending on mitigation and adaptation activities. Again, trying to get a sense of your exposure to climate risks, because depending on the industry, depending on your geographic dispersion, the risks will be different for companies. You can think of an agricultural company maybe in South Carolina versus a data hosting company in Washington State. Very different industries, different climate risk profiles, and what have you. The fourth bullet point here is they're looking for information on climate targets or goals that are material to your operation. So these are largely greenhouse gas reduction projects and things that you're going. They want to make sure that you have a plan for the future and that you're actually on a reduction path towards hopefully net zero, but they just want to see, what your plans are in that area. And then finally, the last bullet point here is around your governance structure. What is the board of directors role in and senior management's role in managing climate risks? Do you have someone that's reporting directly to the board? Is there board responsibility? Are there financial incentives to aligning with reduction targets or ESG targets? Trying to get a sense of how serious an organization is taking their climate risks and their carbon exposure. So that's really all about that's the nuts and bolts, or the majority of the spirit of the climate related risks from the SEC.
Okay. So we did have a couple of questions actually come in at the beginning, and people want to know how they can prepare now. How can your company prepare now to be in the best position possible when it's time to, really dive into this assessment?
Yep, great question. We really want to make this information actionable, right? So this is all great. What do I do? Is always a great question. It'll depend on what type of registrant, basically large, medium, small, large accelerated flyer or a filer, or a large filer, or the others. There'll be different time periods, which I'll be sharing. But essentially, the two main things that folks will need to be ready for is, number one, you have to have your C-suite be prepared to have the discussions that are necessary to analyze your climate risks. We are susceptible to, floods or sea level rise or extreme heat for our workers that work outdoors. So start having the conversations so you can start making these disclosures. So getting your C-suite ready. There are consulting groups that just cater to educating board of directors, for example, on ESG, climate risks, carbon exposure. So you'll have to do a level of assessment in terms of, do you have to bring in outside help? Do you have to hire people, hire consultants or what have you? But you have to prepare your senior leadership team to be having the management discussions and analysis that would allow for the climate risk disclosures to be written. And then the other big piece is getting the greenhouse gas carbon calculations in order. So scope 3 is removed, so it's a lot easier. Scope 1 is just your direct emissions, so your chimney emissions, your fleet vehicles, your stationary combustion sources, mobile fleet vehicles, and then scope 2 is your electricity, mostly your electricity consumption. So it's easy to do it. You want to, there's great software systems, obviously, like Velocity HS that rely on that, because the key to any good carbon management program is good data, consistent, reliable, auditable data. So looking at software systems, consulting organizations, but really you don't want to be buying software at the last minute when everybody else is buying software or hiring consultants or trying to hire expertise, because you're gonna, be in the mix with everyone else at the same time. So you want to be well prepared, have the ground already laid out. So you've got your tooling in place for your carbon calculations, your management knows, and having the discussions to get the disclosures in place. That would be my general advice to that question.
I think that's great advice. And are there plans in the SEC for scope 3 to be included at some point?
Well, no, but I think that the issue will be revisited. I mean, the CSRD for Europe is much more robust, does require scope 3. A lot of American companies that have a certain level of business in Europe are going to be beholden to the CSRD at a later date than European-based businesses, but they will still be beholden to it and have to report scope 3 emissions anyways. So it's not a terrible idea. A lot of companies are requesting, to be a vendor or, for various reporting frameworks to report scope 3, GRI or the IFRS, various CDP, so it's a good idea to report, because for a lot of companies like Velocity HS, when we did our own footprint on our software company, I mean, scope 3 is by far like 80% plus of our carbon footprint. So just reporting scope 1 and 2 is not really painting a very big picture of our overall impact. So for many reasons, scope 3 is a good idea to report, whether the SEC mandates it now or not. But I have a hard time believing that it will not be required at some point in the future, probably years away. Probably more than 5 years away would be my guess, but it isn't. There are no plans to include it right now.
Okay. We did have another question come in, and I'm sorry, I know I'm interrupting you for what you are
Not
presenting, but what is the current status of the SEC rule with climate-related risk disclosures?
Well, the status is that it's been finalized. I think in terms of the implementation of that, the timetable that I'll be sharing in 2 slides or so will answer that question. But there are no more, as far as I'm aware, any other pending rules. This is it. It was finalized in March of this year. It was delayed several times due to litigation. I was speaking to, I wasn't speaking to, but I listened to an expert that was on the inside track of the SEC's rule and guiding their leadership on what the rule should be. And his comments to the conference that I attended was, in the entire roughly 100-year history of the SEC, they have never been sued more on any issue than whether scope 3 emissions should be included or not in the rule. So it was very contentious, but it was eventually dropped. From my knowledge, that was the big change. There was a few other changes, but that was the big change in the final rule, and I'm not aware of any further pending rules. So it's been finalized, it's locked and loaded, the timelines have been set.
Good to know.
And I'll share with you the folk, everyone here will there's a link that I'll be sharing as well to the background information. In terms of the just rounding out the disclosures, I did want to cover, Jessica, with the audience, the financial impacts disclosure category. It's really just understanding, disclosing what companies are facing in terms of costs due to severe weather events. Again, all those tornadoes, hurricanes, droughts that I was talking about. So, what are your capitalized costs, expenditures, charges, losses? You know, the financial categories that companies have incurred due to severe weather events. Again, trying to understand your exposure to severe weather events and how it's actually financially impacting organizations. The second bullet point here, in terms of the costs associated with carbon offsets and renewable energy credits. So the SEC is trying to get an idea to provide investors of that idea of what mitigation or reduction strategies are costing, carbon reduction strategies are costing the companies, again, to see their exposure. If they're spending a significant amount of money in this area, you know, is that going to impact valuation, business forecast, outlooks, their ability to compete in a low carbon environment? So that's kind of the idea with the second bullet here. And then the final one is if companies' estimates on their financial performance are or were impacted by severe weather events, then they want to have a description of those impacts. So how are severe weather events impacting your business outlook, your forecast for your organization? Again, all trying to get an idea of exposure risk to climate events. So that is separate from climate risk disclosures. It's really how are climate risks impacting your bottom line? That's the whole idea with this category of disclosure. The next category that I wanted to briefly discuss is how companies need to present these disclosures to the SEC. And it's pretty simple. It's registrants need to file in your regular statements and annual reports, your 10K reports. So this is going to go in with everything else that you have to do on an annual basis anyways. This is just another inclusion in the normal package that you would submit to the SEC. So it's going to be part and parcel of your regular submissions, your financial information that you have to provide every year. And it is going to be auditable, and carbon emissions have to be financial grade. So it's really just adding to the mix of information that you have to submit. And the other point here, because it is important, and it's another reason to move to software, is that in order for the information for all these disclosures and financial impacts and greenhouse gas emission numbers, is that the information is machine readable for easier disbursement and sharing with investors, the investment community, rather than it just being text or PDFs or on websites. So this is the data is going to be mined and machined and analyzed. So the reporting has to be electronically tagged in inline XBRL, which a lot of software vendors do that automatically. So that is another reason to move to adopt a digital strategy. So here's the timeline that I was referencing a couple of times. So the first row is your large accelerated filers, followed by your accelerated filers, and then there's multiple groups in others. Generally speaking, the flow of the disclosures, those four categories that I was talking about, you'll need to report on climate-related risks first, followed by financial impacts, then your emissions reporting, and then third-party auditing or attestation reports. The way to read this is climate risks need to be disclosed covering your fiscal year 2025. That's for large accelerated filers. So that will be published, typically in Q1 of 2026, covering 2025 operations. That's kind of how to read the table here. I also wanted to put in some other mandatory reporting requirements that will hit some organizations. The California disclosure rule applies in 2026 for the disclosures, and then emissions reporting later. And then the CSRD European disclosures applies in 2028. So there's other mandatory reporting frameworks to be mindful of, other than just the SEC here. But this is a list, this is the kind of the roadmap or the timeline, depending on who you are, of what you need to disclose or submit in your annual reports, in your annual filings, excuse me, by year. Are there any questions popping in through this?
Specifically, I guess not about that, but how do you balance having to not just look at the SEC, as you mentioned, related the SEC rule, but you're having to deal with possibly CSRD. And so as an organization, what are some of best practices that you have seen or that you have talked to clients about in terms of making sure they have all the data they need to hit every single reporting, framework requirements?
Yep. So there will be some, I wanted to mention, that is a fantastic question, Jessica. There will be some consolidation. There used to be SASB and TCFD, and that merged into the IFRS S1, S2. So that's housed now within one body. And, there might be some further coalescing, particularly in the voluntary space, but the mandatory reporting framework or space is growing. California has a rule, Washington, New York, and I believe it's Pennsylvania, but there's 3 other states that have similar rules where you have to disclose your climate-related risks, your carbon emissions. So there's more coming, is the main message there. But in terms of best advice, the CSRD, the European framework, is the most robust. It is the most all-encompassing. If companies adhere to and map their ESG programs to the CSRD reporting framework, you will cover everything else. So you will cover the SEC requirements, the California rules, the other 3 states, GRI, IFRS, CDP. If you're adhering to the CSRD, it is a large. There's climate scenarios, scope 3 inclusion and CSRD. So there's a lot of things that aren't required by the other rules. But that is the best practice, is that if you do follow the CSRD, you're in good shape, because any other mandatory or voluntary framework will be covered.
Going to be covered under that. That is extremely important and good knowledge that you have shared with our attendees. And we did have another question that came in through the poll, and that was having to do with what are the biggest pain points that you hear from clients when they're starting this journey, when they are, analyzing the data, having a third party validate the data that they have, and just setting up a plan, really a program to get to where they need to be to make sure that they are in compliance.
Yeah, so the first thing that I would say in terms of pain points, so there's organizational pain points, and then there's getting the nitty-gritty bits and pieces of the program up and running. The first pain point or bottleneck that leaders that are in charge of getting these things off the ground going is getting excitement, engagement with the C-suite. Fortunately for these folks, this is mandatory. It's not optional. If you're a public company and you want to remain listed, which is an existential threat, if you're delisted, it's not really an option. So that should get some motivation with the C-suite. But traditionally, particularly with the voluntary frameworks and maybe where ESG was 5-10 years ago, it was if you wanted to paint a picture, have a good story to tell, marketing exercises, maybe differentiate your product, going down the path of sustainability, ESG, corporate social responsibility was a tougher slog because maybe the business case wasn't readily evident. But now that we're in the mandatory, and this is really a compliance task, you have to do it. That should help engage the C-suite to start having the discussions that are required to make these disclosures. The other pain point is that on the carbon footprint standpoint, if you don't have your sources of emissions, if you don't know where you're consuming fossil fuels, you don't know who has the invoices, the records, that is going to be a slog. It always is a slog, even if you're a fairly easy company that you would think, like I was involved with doing our own footprint for our own company, and tracking down our property managers for our offices in Cork, Ireland, and in Tampa, and in Perth, Australia. And well, we get a bill. Sometimes we don't get a bill. Sometimes it's just one bill, and they just charge us a percentage. So I mean, even something as simple as just getting electricity bills from offices can be complicated for a service-based organization. So, if you've got refrigerants and service times and diesel storage tanks and purchasing renewable energy credits and engaging in power purchasing agreements with local utilities to purchase renewable energy, all sorts of scope 3, employee commuting, business travel, supply chain purchases, it is a data problem. And you're going to have to get to the bottom of that. Everything else, it will be much easier and downhill after you solve your data issues. So that will be a pain point to get the carbon footprint program off the ground.
No, thank you for that very detailed explanation. And something that we do talk about on many of the events we do is the fact that there are still so many companies that use spreadsheets, that use Excel, and it's about making that switch to a platform software that can really increase your efficiency, but also, serve as a check to make sure that your data is accurate.
Yes, and one of the biggest reasons people get out of spreadsheets is because of all the emission factors that you need to keep track of. On the fossil fuel side of things, they don't change too often. Diesel's diesel, and the emission factors are pretty well known and static. But electricity, if you've got offices in 38 countries around the world, guess what? They change every year. And to manage that in a spreadsheet and to make sure that everything's funneling to scope 2 and you're purchasing renewable energy credits here, but not here, and here you've got partial coverage, it's just a data minefield. And when you go with a digital solution, a software solution, they have all the emission factors. For Velocity's case, we purchased the IEA's factors for every single country in the world. So from Botswana to Vietnam, it doesn't matter. Your electricity emission factors are managed by your software vendor, and they're updated every year, and they're auditable. Your third-party auditor can come in and see the last 5 years for your factory in Lisbon, and see all the different changes in emission factors and whatnot. That's just one small part of the benefit of moving to a digital solution. But yes, emission factors and keeping track of them is a huge headache.
We actually had a great question that just came in, but I want to ask something real quick. And that is, when you are gathering data, as you said, electricity data, electrical data from, the different buildings where people are working, what about those who work for public companies who work from home and gathering all that data?
Yep. So in pre-pandemic days, mostly employee commuting was physically taking a mode of transportation, trains, bicycles, cars, walking, what have you. Now, like Velocity is a remote first company, so I work at home. I go in the office about once a week, but only because I want to. There is no mandate to do so. So the electricity and natural gas that we're using at home while we're working is now still going into the employee commuting category. So that's a category of scope 3 emissions. So there's running calculations, standing calculations, per full-time employee. The average natural gas and electricity consumption from working at home is X amount. So times that by how many employees, by how often they work at home, and then we can get a standing calculation in the application. There's nothing that customers actually need to enter. It's just a standing calc every month. And then you can change the number of employees or whatever the ratio, the calculation is running off of to change the numbers. But other than that, we just understand the how your organization's is working during implementation, set up the standing calc, and then there's nothing else to do. The calculations are run for you. But yes, there's a million anomalies. That's one of them. So you have to obviously work with a company that knows the greenhouse gas protocol rules. Our software adheres to the greenhouse gas protocol, and that's one of the rules that based on different activities, where do these things fall in your carbon footprint, and that's a great example.
Got it. Well, I know we're basically out of time right now. I just want to make sure there isn't anything, else that you want to share before we have to close up. And if you have additional questions for David, please feel free to reach out to him, reach out to the team. we will submit all the questions to him as well, if you think of something after.
Yep. Just in summary, really quick, because I know we're out of time. The 4 categories of disclosure again, and these are by due dates. It's the climate-related risk that you're going to need to prepare first. So that should be your first order of business, followed by the financial impacts, and then your greenhouse gas emission reporting, and then a bit down the road, the third-party auditing. Identifying your risks, what are your mitigation strategies? Are you setting carbon reduction targets, your governance structure? That's really the gist of the climate disclosures, what companies are spending on the, what are the impacts to the business forecasts, is really around the financial disclosures piece there. And then your disclosures must be XBRL tagged for machine learning for mass analysis and distribution. But as I mentioned before, the overall one-liner for summary is that climate-related disclosures, they're now a regulatory and compliance task and complement traditional financial disclosures. So this is just going into the basics of what companies have to do on an annual basis.
Well, very actionable advice that we got from you today, David. And I know we are out of time, but this is a good question that came in, and I don't know if you know the answer to it, but I'm going to pose it to you. Is there a central place we can go to identify different cities or states that are looking to pass into law GHG emissions reporting requirements? I think I know the answer to this, but
I don't know if there's one central location that I'll let you put in your suggestion, Jessica, because I don't know of one.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I don't believe there is a central place that would also require companies, organizations, states, governments sharing information, which is becoming better in today's world, but isn't always as forthright and as forthcoming as we would like. So unfortunately, thank you to our attendee who did ask that question, but I will do a little bit of research and see what I can find and get back to you. But again, thank you, David. Thank you to the team from Velocity EHS for being a part of the 2024 Solution Summit, and we look forward to working with you more in the future.
Appreciate it, everyone. Thank you, Jessica. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.